right. Well, welcome everybody. My name is David Hodges, and I'm on the business team at Chaney and Associates. And I'm joined today here with our host, Steve Chaney, who is the CEO of our company. If you haven't had a chance to interact with our company or don't know much about us, we are a CPA firm for churches. We love the opportunity to add value and partner alongside pastors and their staff to help bring a dynamic solution to hopefully add value to the systems and processes that they already have in place, specifically in the accounting department with finances, budgeting, and payroll and such things. We're very excited about that you guys are joining us today. We are excited about just an opportunity to meet you, connect with you, and hopefully add some value to you today with the topic of the stewardship blueprint. We're going to be talking about some budgeting and different things. And in a minute, I'm going to kick it over to Steve to talk a little bit more about that. But we appreciate you guys joining. It's going to be a good day today.
Yes, it is. It's going to be a great day. A lot of people all over the United States are joining us today. And David, you're in Dallas. I'm in I'm near Sacramento, California. And so we are spread across the country, serving hundreds of churches. It's great to be with everyone today. My name is Steve Chaney. I'm the managing partner at Chaney and Associates. I'm a CPA here, and we serve the local church to be a blessing. And we're looking forward today to getting into the topic of budgeting and looking into how to strategically plan your budget and organize it from a perspective of a church.
Steve, if you're ready, I think we can dive straight into this. I know that people are probably excited to get started on the topic. I know this is something that comes up a lot for churches, especially as you progress through the seasons of church life. But even at the earlier stages, even at a church plant stage, budgeting is crucial for overall health. So where do we start? What would be step one if somebody's wanting to approach this or attack this, or maybe even initiate this for their church? What would be the first step for them?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, first of all, budgeting is not typically fun, right? So nobody just says, let's just start budgeting today. But ultimately, a budget is a plan, right? Jesus said it this way: who would build a house unless you count the costs, right? You got to sort of put a plan together so that people know where we're going and how to structure that together. So ultimately, it's very important to do that. And typically what I do is I start with, what are the absolutes? Like, what's our mortgage payment, or what's our rent? What's our monthly utility bill? Like, how are we actually spending our money? Sort of categorize all the stuff that's sort of, in the basic way to put it, what's in your check register. So that's ultimately what you want to do, is start to organize it in a way that's like, what are we doing? And so much, it's so amazing too about money, because sometimes you can't remember what you did last week. But if you look at your check register or like your receipts, you're like, oh, now I remember what I was doing last Wednesday. I went out to dinner with this person, or we were at that event, or something of that sort. So it's amazing how money triggers things in our mind, right? And so ultimately that budget, and when you start to organize that sort of that spend that you're having, and then how do you organize that? You sort of organize it by personnel costs or contracted services. You start to organize it in that way, like building operations. What's building operations? Like insurances, utility bills, your garbage, your rents, right? Your common area maintenance. Sometimes they call them CAMs, things of this sort. So you start to organize that. And then everything else could be general administrative, like postage, printing. You start to organize it in that way. And then ministry expenses, like what are those? Like our curriculum, our program expenses, food for the nursery, things of this sort, because you got to have money for ministry expenses. So that's ultimately the area to do that. And then once you start to organize it, then you start to dream, right? Like, what do we want this to do? What is our desired outcomes, right? Because I always say this: a budget is not a bucket of money, but it's a plan, right? And plans change. And plans should be reviewed on a continual basis, right? I don't know if you should be changing them monthly, but definitely quarterly. You should be reviewing quarterly, because a month is not a trend, but a quarter is a trend. So you might be trending downward. You could be trending, you could be growing and going up. And if your ministries are increasing, you do not want to just say, hey, just throw money at it, because that's not intentional. Budgeting should be intentional in everything that we do. It's the idea of, um, sort of Dave Ramsey puts it like this: name every dollar, right? And that's just the way you got to do it. You just got to just say, hey, what's our parameters of what we're going to do as we grow? Ultimately, if you just spend everything you have, then there's no focus to it at all. So that's ultimately what you want to do. And then from there, you start analyzing what are the types of income we have. If you're a church plant, it's going to be very difficult to analyze that income. You might have some seed money. And then that's when you have a real sort of what I call a seasonal budget, right? You got your launch phase, then you got the next phase of growth. And ultimately, every time you start to grow more, you spend more. And then the return on investment comes later. So again, you want to be making those good investments. So that's where I would start in that regards, and get all that organized, and then just do something. So a lot of times people think, well, it's too complicated, I can't do it. But
Right.
you're actually budgeting every day. Because if you can't budget, your checkbook will tell you how much you can budget, because the bank will stop you from spending, right? And so that's really a bad way to lead, but you're called to leadership, because budgeting is a form of stewardship. And God gives us resources, and we as obviously Christian leaders are required to steward well. And if we steward well, guess what happens? He gives us more. And if we're not growing, guess what happens? We should ask ourselves, how are we stewarding? And ultimately, how are we budgeting, right? Because sometimes you have seasons where you are investing, and it's causing more cash flow to go out the door. But you should have a return on that investment, right?
Right.
It's just like the parable of the talents, right? You want to invest it to get a return. You don't want to bury it. So that's ultimately the idea of budgeting and going forward with that. So
Yeah, that's great. And as we're talking about these budgetings, you said, there can be quarters where you could see upward trends, and obviously there can be times and moments and seasons where we see these downward trends. Where do you see that happening the most? Like where, when we start to survey these churches, their accounts, their finances, their budgets, where do you see, the largest gap come from in the downward trending seasons or quarters?
well, ultimately, there's parts to it where you get a lot of momentum from certain areas to go forward. And then after that, sort of lose a little bit of momentum, right? So you got to keep refreshing things ultimately. Where I see a lot of momentum is in new church plants. Obviously, everybody's fresh, they're excited, they're growing. Then you get about a year or 2 years into it, and you're like, wow, what happened? Like all my launch team is gone. Or some of my key leaders decided to leave, or they're just not tithing as much, because again, it's very psychological. So you got to sort of like continue to invest in people and in ministry.
Right.
And a lot of times what happens is, why is it downturn? Because we're not investing in ministry. We're investing more in administration. So as the church grows, we think like, oh, we've got to have a full-time admin person, but they have no ministry duties, right? And
Right.
what I say is, when you want to get scalable, when you really want to grow, and when God's investing more in you, resources that then requires greater levels of stewardship, we cannot forget what we're called to do: minister. I always equate it to this, like Jesus said, feed the 5,000. It's feeding the 5,000, right? And he said, what do you got? 5 loaves, 2 fish. He goes, okay. As you hand it out, he told him how to organize it all, get them all in groups, right? Guess what? That's a budget. That's tools. That's setting things apart. And then get them all organized. Once you get them organized out, as you start to minister, I'm going to bless you. Everybody thinks too, also in a budget, before you begin, you got to have all the money in place. It never happens that way, ever. It's a plan, and as you walk it out, then you can go through it. And so ultimately, in that feeding the 5,000, they had 5 loaves, 2 fish, right? That's what they had. Well, guess what? Without faith, it's impossible to please God. So guess what? You got to have faith in your budget. So in those dry times, what faith is driving you to hope for things, to have the evidence of things not seen, right? And so
Mhm.
there's going to be those seasons. But when those seasons come, don't say, well, guess what? We're going to have to do all this administration over here. We want to know, we want to minister to people. So what we say is, as you grow in any organization, whether it be a mega church or a brand new church plant, everybody should have dual status. They should have some administrative duty and they should have a lot of ministry duty. You should never just have a person who's 100% administration. Even if you say like, well, it's just the bookkeeper and they're just doing donor tracking. Well, turn the donor tracking into stewardship,
Yeah, that's
right?
great.
In every way. Like like there was a ton of like let's just talk about income analysis, right? And we've had churches that are literally their income's going down, not going up. So guess what we told one of our accountants to do? Start analyzing all the failed transactions that happen in the donor management system. Now, what does that mean? Somebody set up a repeating journal or repeating gift, and that transaction, that credit card's gone bad and it's just not done it.
Expired.
So expired. So the person who was doing donor tracking started calling up all the people that their credit card transactions were failing and said,
Wow.
is there anything we can pray about? Is there anything you can do? Hey, I just wanted you to know, like, you have this credit card that the system keeps trying to bill. Well, that one church grew in revenue $60,000 of tithe because the people were like, oh, I didn't even know. Had no idea that it was failing. Had no idea what was even going on in their own stewardship life. So now a person who has to do donor tracking literally was like, let's go and do that. And now
Wow.
guess what happened? Income increased. More
Right.
money so it was right there. It's sort of interesting, the money's in the fish's mouth, right? Where the money's in the sanctuary. It's all right
Yeah.
there. The money's in the people, right? And God's given provision. So what we talked about is, even in those dry times, where can we look to be better stewards?
Mhm.
Is there areas? So we leverage technology. You want to leverage technology. You want to have everything in the cloud. You do not want to have a server local. If you have a server local, you're just wasting money. There's no reason to do that. And so we leverage technology and then process. And that's where a firm like ours comes into play. We work with churches a lot. That's all we do, is to, with a process, we ordinate a process to do financial stewardship with accounting and payroll. And so then what that does is keep administrative costs down and ministry costs higher, because then you can serve people. And if you have a money problem, you're not serving enough people, because God promised whatever you need, he's going to give you. Whatever he's called you to do, he's going to empower you. He's not going to give you more than you can handle. And so therefore, if you're having a budgeting problem, really, it's a spiritual problem. Number one, you got to make sure you have the right tools in place. So you build
Right.
that trust, that you can trust the system, right? And then you just got to be able to serve more people. Okay.
Right. So
That's
good.
good. Yeah.
So good. So you mentioned, that one example of one of the churches kind of going through their, budgets, going through the failed credit card attempts, or
Mm-hmm.
maybe somebody set up a recurring giving and it just expired, their card expired, and they went and found, newfound revenue. What are maybe some other ways that churches could maybe survey their books, survey their budgets, and maybe find what are some other areas, departments that you've seen over the 22 plus years of serving, not just in this accounting department or financial field, but specifically for churches, so specifically the 501c3 nonprofit, over all those years, where else have you seen not necessarily money not used well, but maybe money that we could maybe steward better?
Yeah. So, a couple different things. First of all, I always start with income. Income is the place that people should look first, right? In everything you do. Pastor Rob Ketterling, he puts it this way, that giving is like a muscle. For it to grow, you have to exercise it. Okay. And so that's important to do. So you have to find ways to encourage people to give and to participate in that act of, worship to God. That's what it is,
Right.
turning it over. Um, we obviously want our people to live under an open heaven. That's what it talks about in Malachi. So ultimately, that's what you want to do is find those areas. If you say like, this is how many adults we have in the sanctuary, this is what the average income is for our area, right? This is, oh wow, we're way underperforming for just a basic tithe of just a poverty level. And then you start to
Mhm.
analyze like, okay, well, we have 4 or 5 givers that give a lot. I mean, that's great. Don't stop them. But those are spike gifts that if that one person left, we could be in trouble. So you start to analyze that income. And then you start to develop, okay, we need to have a better discipleship program for tithing, for
Wow, that's great.
giving, for generosity, right? And sometimes you'll be like, well, wait a second. Like, I don't want people to give to like kingdom builders, legacy, whatever you want to call it, missions, because I want them to give to tithe. But guess what? If they don't start exercising that muscle in something, they might not ever give to the regular giving of tithe. So
Mhm.
that kingdom builders could spark something, that missionary could spark something in them that gives the spirit of generosity that then brings them back to what they should be doing in obedience of tithing. So that's one
That's
thing that
great.
we do. Another thing you do too is I find a lot of this is just analyzing your like literally go down your check register and start to understand how do we spend money. Like for example, um, this one church I know of has a great coffee company that provides them coffee, right?
Right.
And you know, at Chaney and Associates, we've got the meanest Keurig machine you've ever seen in our break area. So it's like, you know, and everybody teases me about that because you know, I'm just a table type of a guy, just get a cup of coffee. But so you spend all this money on a coffee stuff to have coffee for your weekly service.
Right.
And then you go through the credit cards and you start to analyze, wow, look at all the people going to Starbucks. Our staff going to Starbucks and we're like, wait, we have a coffee service. So you start to understand like, how am I spending money? Like, oh,
Yeah.
we have all these subscriptions to this or that. How do we
Yeah.
spend our money? Like, you know, it's the little foxes that spoil the vine, right? And it's
Yeah.
like the little things add up, right? Into money. So
They
start
do.
to analyze these funds and how we're spending them. And then you start to understand like, yeah, we don't need that. That's not a priority, right?
Wow. Yeah.
And
That's
and
great.
so that's what I do when I'm budgeting. I also like to live by parameters. Like I say, like, okay, if we have a mortgage payment in a building, maybe it should never be more than 25% of our monthly budget,
Mhm.
right?
Right.
Maybe all building operations, including utility bills, rents, or whatever it is, shouldn't be more than 25%. Because you got to have money to pay your people,
Mhm.
right? So as your income grows, guess what? That building comes less and less a percentage, right?
Right.
And so you've got to it's sort of a mixture of things to do there. A healthy thing is a church giving, right? Well, is the church have any area that they give out, right?
Right.
Some of our what I would call gold standard churches give away 10% of their tithes and offerings every month. Guess what? God can expand and help you live on the 90% just like he does individuals. And if
Right.
you live on the 90, it's going to go farther than the 100. So you start to just run parameters in there. If you have a church that has a mortgage payment, guess what? You probably are going to spend less on salaries and benefits, right? You're
Right.
probably going to be between 35 and 45% of your overall budget of tithes on salaries and benefits if you have a mortgage. If you keep your building costs down, you can put more towards people costs. But for the ministry side, I mean, you want to have at least 10 to 15% from the perspective of how you serve the ministries, and some of that's general administrative. Like you got to have copiers, you got to have curriculum, things of this sort, right? You can't just all
Right.
just put it on, you know, snacks for the nursery, but you got to have snacks for the nursery. You got to have money to serve people on Sunday. You got to have hospitality. You got to have volunteer appreciation. If you're not doing that kind of stuff, you're literally just funneling money around. You got to
Right.
serve people. So in every budget that we establish, you got to serve people. So,
So good. I think that's a perfect
mhm.
segue into the next question. Is something that we get a lot from different churches and pastors, and it relates to things like conferences, special events, things like mission trips, things like the men's and women's retreats, things like, the kids retreats, some things that may be an annual recurrence, maybe some things that are not.
Hmm.
Talk to me a little bit about, and to us about, how to incorporate things like that into the budget. And then also have to
Hmm.
assume maybe year over year, this might become a little bit more expensive. Maybe some things become less expensive. Kind of how do you attack those major events in the church space as it relates to budgets?
Yeah, let's go over events first because
Okay.
that's a topic that really can catch a church off guard. Okay, so let's say you're going to have a kids camp in the summer or a
Right.
youth camp, something of that sort, and all of a sudden you're starting to collect funds for that in like February, March, April, May, and there's a ton of income coming in. It could be a
Right.
big youth camp because by the time you have to buy everything, registrations, all that, a lot of cash comes in. And guess what? If you're not segregating those funds into a separate department, we departmentalize things for our
Right.
clients. If you're not
Right.
separating those funds out of the operating budget, you think you're doing really well in those months because you have all this extra income. And then guess what happens?
Right.
You got to pay the campground in June or July and you're like, "Wait, all those expenses happen and we thought we had plenty of cash." But
Right.
if you departmentalize things and you separate those out of the operating budget, guess what? It's just a flow through. So you
Right.
want to have things like that are a flow through. Now, like on the kids camp, let's say this. Let's say that you say, "Hey, it's $100 a kid for registration. You're going to take, 50 kids, $5,000, whatever, easy numbers." But then let's say the church says, "We want to sponsor 10 kids to go." Well, when those donations come in, you first put them into the operation budget, but then you transfer it over to the department for those kids, that kids camp. And so we segregate all those funds over. We get them out of the operating budget because we don't want that income to offset that we think we have income that we don't have. Okay.
Right.
Another thing that's very typical to that is like a building fund. So you have church plans, you have churches that are growing and they're like, "Hey, we got to expand, we got to build out, right? We need a new sanctuary, we need a new building, okay? Multi-purpose room, whatever you want to call it." And guess what? They're raising all this money for building, and they're designated a building, but they don't departmentalize it. They don't segregate it out of operations. And then all of a sudden they find out, guess what? We spent our building fund on operations and we didn't know it because people took their tithe and they put it towards building, right?
Right.
Because again, it's this psychology thing. So people want to give to a need, and they only have so much funds to give, right? And they've not fully understood the whole idea of tithing and offerings. And so that's an
Right.
education thing. But ultimately, the way you get around all this stuff is departmentalization, right? And segregating those areas. And then if it crosses like a fixed asset, or excuse me, a fiscal year, then
Mhm.
you can roll those funds forward, right?
Right.
The basic way to think about this also too is you could just have a separate checking account. Now we don't recommend that because we do departmentalization, but the best practice is the departmentalization. But then ultimately you could have a separate checking account for those type of things. And when the money's spent, then you transfer it back. And so you want to be segregating that stuff because I tell you, your budget, if you're not, you're going to think you're doing great and you aren't.
Yeah.
And the expenses are going to happen. And I'll just tell you, there's churches that we have that are legacy churches, been operating for decades. And that is the Achilles heel for them, is not segregating their designated funds. So you got to know what's operating budget and what's designated budgets. Okay. And in our world, designated budgets never go negative. They always have to be self-funded. Okay. Meaning if you don't raise it, you can't spend it. Operations, I mean, you might have the kids department be a little bit over and the youth department be a little bit less, and they all net together by the end of the year and it washes. But for designated, never. It's got to be there to spend it.
Yeah. Gotcha.
Okay. Yeah.
Gotcha. I think that's a probably good segue into the next question. Even as we talk about these different budgets, different events, and things that happen seasonally. What about the things that don't happen seasonally? The things that are unexpected.
Mm.
The panic budget, if you will. What's kind of a best practice as we look at things that happen? I've even talked to different pastors and churches, like over in the Asheville, North Carolina area, which their budget going into the year was one thing, and then the natural disasters happened, or different things unexpectedly happened to, maybe even a staff member.
Hmm.
How do you kind of holistically approach that? When we start talking about budgets, when we start talking about the finances and the payroll, what's kind of your thoughts on that?
Yeah, it's a great question. So here's the typical situation. You're in a church and the HVAC goes out, and now they have no air conditioning, and they live in Dallas, Texas, and it's hot, right?
It's real
It,
hot.
it can get real hot real fast. And so, what do you do in those kind of situations? Do you go out and borrow the money, or do
Mhm.
you start planning over time? Well, if it's an emergency and you never planned for it, guess what you're going to do? You're going to borrow the money.
Right.
You're going to get a equipment lease, something like this, and you're going to borrow it and pay it off over time. Here's a nice little way to get ahead of those type of things. You can do like a general reserve, like a building reserve. You could start to save 2% of your tithes and offerings every month and treat it like an expense to operations. But then guess what? That 2% goes over into a building reserve fund,
Right.
or like an audio video reserve fund, or like an IT reserve. And then as you start to build up over time, you start to say, wow, we're getting a lot of money in this reserve. But then when those big things happen, guess what? You have the cash to pay for it. And it's like eating an elephant. How do you do it? Well, one bite at a time. There's no way to swallow an elephant whole. But you take that little thing over time. And so as the church grows, guess what? It's a percentage. Just naming that dollar. 2% goes to facility reserve every month, or you call it general reserve, whatever. And then guess what? Another way to do this is when the spikes happen. So let's say that you have a person in your church and they pass away, and you get an inheritance or $100,000 check, let's just say from an estate. Well, that's a spike gift. I wouldn't spend that in operations because you never knew you were going to get it. I would put that to a reserve. And then that
Right.
might be your future building program or a future down payment on a piece of land or something like that. Because you never knew you were going to get that. That's sort of a windfall. Plus, that person is not going to be tithing anymore because they just passed away. So you better not live off of it anyways, right? So don't think like,
That's
oh, my tithes are going up. So those spike gifts, give to it. Or business owners who spike a lot at the end of the year, don't put 100% of it into operations. Take a portion of that and put it off to the side for the rainy day fund. So when the months happen that you're down, because there's obviously months in the summer we're down. People come back up in the fall, go down in January, February because they're paying off their Christmas bills, ultimately from December, and then you can have some cushion to live on, right? Again, and here's what I'll tell you: are those churches that tithe 10% of their tithes and offerings? They also have reserves. And I will tell you, they have emergency reserves, they have facility reserves, and they're just slowly saving money over time. And all of a sudden you're like, wow, how did I get $500,000 in this reserve? How did I get $2 million? And it can happen to anybody, right? Especially when you're taking all the spikes too that happen.
Yeah.
So reserves are huge. And guess what? In your budgeting, it's easy because you just say, I'm going to take 1% of tithes and offerings, or I'm going to take 2%, whatever it is.
Yeah. That's great.
Yeah.
Is that where
So,
you would start? For the people that are watching or that are part of the
mhm,
webinar today, and maybe thinking to themselves, like, if I had to start in one spot, one reserve, one department, and what
mhm.
percentage would it be? What would you say to that?
I would say start with something.
Just general
Yeah.
reserve. Let's just get
Yeah.
it rocking.
Hmm.
All right. And
It's
is it, what would you, so as far as percentages of the monthly tithe, is it that 1% or is it the 2%? Like, what would you encourage somebody to start with?
yeah. So that's the reserves. On the tithe, I do 10%. Now I'm an
Right.
all in guy. I just jump in jump in the deep end and like, let's swim and make this work. Right. I mean, that's the only thing God said we can challenge him on. So let's just challenge him a little and see what he'll do. Right.
Right.
Well, I mean, let's just do it. And on the other side, the reserves, like 1, 2, 3%, whatever it is, you might want to say, I'm going to do 4% for now. And then when we reach a certain level, I'll bring it down to 3%. And reach another level, I'll bring it down to 2%. And then because you have to do some reserve analysis too. Sometimes you just say, like, we just got too much money in there. We don't need to save as much more. So when you sort of reach the desired reserve level, you can lower it, maybe reallocate those funds over. And then if you have that big purchase come in and the reserve goes down, then build it back up.
Great.
Or you can just keep adding to it, right? But you just add to it a little bit every month once you reach your goals. So number one, what's the important thing is have a goal, right?
That's good.
I would just tell you, like, live on the 90%. That should be your first goal. And if that means we're going to get to like 5%, then go up to 6, go up to 7 if you have to build into it. Because sometimes that's an earnings thing.
Right.
But also I feel like we should just challenge the Lord on it and just jump in and be about that.
Great. Great.
And some churches will match it and say, like, what we raise in missions plus we always want to make sure that the church as a whole gives 10% of our tithe budget away. And sometimes they raise that separately. And that's one way to do it as well. And then those reserves, like I said, it's important. Now, what about when you want to hire new staff? Okay, the first thing is more ministry than administration. So everybody has to do ministry and some administration. Even at Chaney Associates, nobody can be 100% administrative. They have to be productive. They have to serve the clients, and they have to do administrative tasks behind the scenes as well. So even at our own company, you can't do that. We have to serve people. So doing that's good. Now, if you say, like, I want to hire this new position, or I want to have a full-time kids pastor. Well, I've heard of pastors going to like wealthy business people in their church and going, I need you to fund this position for a year. And I'm going to grow this church, and then we'll have enough tithe to fund them in the next year or two. Yeah. But like, it's giving money to serve people, right? That's a great thing. 1-to-1, it's going to grow, and we're going to leverage it even more. So get ahead of those things. We get so much behind it. We don't put the plan first, like, right? Just like Jesus said, who built a house unless you count the cost? Meaning, get it written down, get it architect, get the engineering, get the plan in place of what we're going to do versus like, okay, let's just go hire a kids pastor and then let's figure out their job description. Let's figure out what they're going to do. Like, begin with the end in mind. What do we want? We want to have a children's department that does this, has this many people, has this many volunteers, right? Because a lot of times we hire people to just do a job. Right. Well, we should hire people to develop people to do jobs.
That's so good.
Isn't that what the ministry is about, right? Is the fivefold ministry, like helping all these volunteers do all this stuff. So really, they should be able to develop volunteers. That should be the first job description of any minister. If you are not developing people, you're not a minister. I mean, I'm a CPA. What do I know, right? So what do I know? But all I'm telling you is, like, that should be job one, because you cannot hire everybody to do everything.
Right.
You just can't. You got to have volunteers, and you got to have it leveraged to do that. And you look at big churches, they'll tell you this. If the pastor can keep people on the edge of their seats and speak well and engage with the people, the only thing holding them back is the plan of attack for how everything's organized in the administration and doing the ministry. And it's going to take people to do that.
Right.
You got to have people to serve. You got to have engaged volunteers. You got to have that employee appreciation, that volunteer appreciation, things of this sort. So leadership has to institute areas in which to grow and then to get a return. And if you have people on staff who are not growing leaders and team members, you really need to consider where the return on your investment's coming from.
Yeah.
So you got to be leverageable. So hopefully I answered really that question.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I want to speak to the intentionality. I think, even throughout the webinar and all the different things that we've talked about, everything that you've talked really does require a different level of intentionality. just another thorough look, an
Hmm.
intentional interaction with the congregant or the tither, intentionality with the team. And so hopefully that, encourages people today that, maybe the systems aren't broken, maybe they're not too far off. Maybe it's just another step of intentionality with the team, with the budgets, with the tithe, with the people at our church. So I think that's
Hmm.
great. I want to ask one more question, then we can get to a Q&A session. So again, if you guys have any questions, feel free to drop them in the comment. We'll be going through them at the end. Steve, we've talked about a lot. I think the last question before we go into Q&A is how. Growing up, my dad's a pastor and a preacher, and he always said, with every message, there needs to be a so what. Like, why are we talking about this? And then, well, what now? What are we going to do now? How are we going to implement this into the church? So, with all the different budgets, all the different conversations, all the different systems and tools and structures, how do we not break budget? How do we implore this into our churches? Like, what's the next step for the people listening?
Wonderful. Well, first you got to have a system in place that can maintain it, right? So there's many
Right.
different accounting systems out there. We use a program called Zero at Chaney Associates. We also have budgeting tools that we've built for our clients. And no better way to get involved with that than to engage Chaney and Associates to help you with that. So that's part of what we do. We want to help the local church grow. But ultimately, if you said, "Hey, we're going to go with this for a while and do it ourselves," because ultimately, at the end of the day, you're going to bring in a professional, right? You're going to bring in people that are going to consult you, give you the best practices, and then you're going to be like, "Why didn't I do this many years ago?" That's what's going to happen. Why didn't I engage these people years ago? And then why didn't I just do what they told me to do? But if you wanted to do some stuff yourself, then we use a program called, it used to be called Divvy. Now it's bill.com, bill, spend, and expense. That's the great tool. It's
Yeah.
it's free for churches. We'll have a link, I believe, in this area when they get it published. You can click there. If you click there, just let you know, they know it's through us. They do track that for us, which is great because we will actually help you, give you some stuff and help you learn how to set it up and how to use it. But ultimately, if you use that product and you say, okay, this is how you do credit card spend and this is how you do budgeting with reimbursements, you'll never go over budget. You'll never. So utilizing technology to then what I call is you want to have boundaries, but not barriers, right? You want to give leaders, they got to know how to operate. They got to know what to work with. They got to have a sandbox, in other words. And if they don't have that sandbox and a tool to use that with, they'll never be able to, it'll always be a frustration to them, right?
Yeah.
And then you have to look at what's the outcomes of it. So the outcomes is the system, right? The financial tools that you use. Looking at those budgets to say like, are they over budget? They under budget? Well, if you use Divvy, you'll never be over budget. But like in your accounting software, I mean, you could do other things to get you out of line. You just got to bring it back in line, right? You got to be testing that. It's a regular occurrence, right? You should have a theme. You shouldn't do it daily, but you should be looking at it weekly, if not monthly for sure. And you should get ahead of it, not behind it. So a lot of people
Right.
look at financial reports, 45, 50, 60 days after the month end. Well, we're already on to the next couple months. You got to get ahead of it. So you got to have rhythms in place, just like you wouldn't miss a payroll day, right? Or you wouldn't miss your rent payment. You might miss it, but you're not going to miss it for long because people are going to get upset. So you shouldn't miss these rhythms of financial reporting and get in the habit of doing this on a regular basis. And so that's some stuff you should do. You can also reach out to us. We're going to be doing more of these webinars. We've got a podcast called Church Advisory Podcast. David Hodges is here to support you. We're going to give you all those contact information. So ultimately, what you should do is engage, right? Right. This is what we ask our congregants of our church. If you get involved in the community, if you get involved in the small groups, if you get involved in the discipleship program, guess what? You're going to start seeing results. You're going to start seeing things happen. And guess what? When we bring God into the mixture, and that's the beautiful thing about what we do, because everything's faith. And if we just build in faith and God goes, well, guess what? I'm not contractual. He gets into a covenant relationship.
Mm-hmm.
and he'll go before us and he'll organize it and he'll start giving us those inventions and those ideas and start ordering our steps. That's what's so awesome about it.
Yeah,
So,
absolutely. And like Steve said, I even saw a comment earlier, somebody asking, are we recording this? Are we going to be sending this out? We will be sending this out to everybody that's joined and
mhm.
registered. And that can absolutely be a resource to you and your team. We would love for you to share that. And like Steve also mentioned, we have a church advisory podcast that you can check out on YouTube and many other platforms. And we're even going to be sharing some tools and resources to you guys after this call as well. But kind of going back to the Q&A, and I'd love to kind of tap into this a little bit more because, Steve, you mentioned Divvy, or as it's renamed to Bill, Spend, and Expense. We had someone ask, Dan asked, what are the best resources for church plant budgeting? Excuse me. And I know you've already mentioned bill.com, Spend, and Expense, but if you want to maybe talk about that a little bit more, maybe some of the other tools that we use to help churches with their budgeting.
Yeah, yeah. Well, we're a full Google Suite firm, so we use Google for everything. We also have a link that we'll be providing to you that you can utilize to help create a tool for your budgeting, just at a basic sense of just like a Google Sheet or a spreadsheet, right? That's typical. But then ultimately, you want to build that out and put it into a system. And what we would
Right.
say is a great system, and we can help set this up for you. We can give you tools and know how. We have a whole system for church plans, just to let you know about how to control all your finances, not only from the budget, from all the way to the financial reporting, and then how to report that to your congregants. And so we have like a DIY, do it yourself price plan, as well as full boutique, and we can help you do it all. So those are the type of things I would use. Then you got to figure out what application you want to use or that software. Like we said, Bill, Spend, and Expense is amazing. There's some other tools that we have. We use a bank called Relay Financial. That's amazing. Bank contacts us about that. We'll tell you everything we know about it and get you set up. Because could you imagine just having full free banking, right? Free wire, domestic, international wires, free ACHing, free everything. It's an incredible program, but it all connects, and that's what you want to do is make all these systems connect one to another. And then if you bring in a process, like we have all the processes in place, then you get that. We call it collaborative stewardship because we collaborate together with you, right? But ultimately, you can start to leverage even more because sometimes people will be like, well, you still have to write the emails. Even though Gmail sends it for you or Outlook sends it for you or Yahoo sends it for you, you still got to write the email, right? You got to know how to write. So you got to know how to budget, right? But if you just come into connection and partnership with a type of consulting service, and to get some coaching on it, that'll help you a lot. So
Yeah, that's great. We got some more questions coming in from Chris. For multi-site churches, do you recommend one operational budget or separate budgets for each campus? That's a great question.
yeah, we've really become sort of an expert in multi-site campus accounting. So you absolutely have to have a budget by campus, and within that by department. Now, it depends on how you organize the multi-site, though. The multi-site could be organized in a way that there's obviously multiple churches, multiple sites, right? But it's one church. But do you control it at a central level? So some organizations have central services, and it's like audio, video, IT, accounting, HR, all this stuff. It's controlled at the level. Maybe they control the children's department at a central level, youth, and then push out all the information from there to the campuses. And there's different ways to organize that. So if you did that and you have a strong central, and then multi-campus at the sort of what I would call ministry level, what I like to do is just track what does it cost to have a campus open. So the facility costs, the HR costs of people that are just dedicated to that campus, right? And you might only have, because that's what matters, is what does it cost to have facilities? What does it cost to have ministry people there? And then what do you bring for tithes and offerings? And then how do they contribute up to central? Very easy budgeting, because that local campus pastor, or like the local person who's controlling that campus, is easily to maintain that. Now, if you are running a multi-campus where it's really just we sort of fellowship together, but every little campus does their own thing, and then they just have their own campus pastor. So it's not like a video venue, but it's more of like, just a fellowship, one to another. A lot of people call that PACs now, parent affiliated churches, but the affiliated church can do what they want, or they have their own pastor. Then you got to sort of break it out. You got to say like a youth budget, a kids budget, an operating budget, a facility budget. Like those are very specific. It's almost like you have a corporation and it's a parent, and you have all these child, depart or like locations or divisions. Let's call them another way. And so, but that's the way I sort of recommend to do that. Is I like the whole idea of central controlling it, because you have branding, you have quality control. You have, this is the way we do it, right? This is the way. And so then you can break down and say, what does it cost to just have a campus? So if you believe that there should be a ministry there in that community, then what does it truly have just for the campus? Because the administration's all done at central.
Right.
And then you get the economies of scale, right? Like you don't need to have an accountant at every campus. You have it at central. It's amazing, just the economies of scale that happen by having a central repository of services.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
That's so good. We're getting some more questions coming in from Kent. How to align budgeting process with stewardship, annual commitments, and pledging? How do you align the two?
Well, that's a great question. I always say when the pledges stop coming in, send out the invoices. Now that's a bad joke, but so you have to align things, and there is a way to do this from the perspective of, I say, what's sustainable, right? So typically, a lot of people would say budget 90% of what came in last year. Again, you get your cushion for the 10% tithing, but let's say you bring in $1 million in 2024. I'm only going to budget it if I bring in 900,000.
Right.
Okay. I'm going to live on the 90 of last year. And then I'm also going to take out spike gifts. So let's say out of that $1 million, we had one person who gave 200,000. I'm sort of going to evaluate that one person who gave 200,000. I'm going to say, what's his normal offering?
Right.
Oh, it should be about 50,000. So I'm going to take 150 out of that. So now I'm down to 850, right? And I might do a percentage of that, like 90% of the 850, and budget for 2025. Now, does that work though? Because you still have all your expenses, you got your mortgage, you got everything. So I'm just going to say there's not a formula for it, but there are things that you can build in to be conservative. Like I'm only going to budget a certain percentage, or I'm going to take out those spike gifts. Or as we start to grow up more, I'm not going to let my expenses grow with it. I'm going to keep them in a consistent manner, right, as to where they are now. So you want to know what is fixed and determinable for your budget expenses, and then what's variable. So fixed and determinable, mortgage payments, fixed and determinable. Typically your utility bills. Recently, that's not been the case with inflation, but ultimately that's fixed and determinable to some degree. So you have some of those things. The variable costs. Well, our kids department is growing a lot. What does that mean? Well, why don't you just say per head on a kid, I'm going to spend $10 per kid a month or something like that, right? And that's what I'm going to budget for. Or does it go up? Is it $25 per kid? Or what is that annually versus what is it seasonal? So a lot of times we go and we don't spend money evenly. We don't spend money evenly 1/12 a year, right? Per month. So you got to also look at seasons of when things come up, when things go down. Another way to do the budgeting is budget for 4 Sundays in a month. And then take those times when you got a fifth Sunday and just put it in the bank. That's cushion.
That's great.
It's sort of like people who get paid 26 times a year, but they live on 24 pays, and they consider those extra 2 payrolls as just extra like savings, right? It's like a forced savings plan, right?
Right.
It really helps when that third paycheck comes in the month, right? So when those 5 Sundays and that fifth Sunday comes in, and typically it's a smaller one anyways, okay? It's not like a big Sunday. It does spike the gift because there's 5 Sundays in the month, but just take that and put it away.
Yeah.
Or utilize it for when the pledges don't come in.
Yeah.
So
yeah, again, it goes back to just intentionality. It's just how intentional are we going to be about this? How much time are we going to spend on it?
And another thing too is this is not even for pledging, right? But some things that we recommend people do is, do they send out quarterly giving statements?
Mm-hmm.
So when January, February, March happen, March closes, send out a statement and say, hey, we just want you to review this, see if it's right. Also, hey, just to be aware, we have these summer activities going on. We've got this stuff to sign up for. We got everything. Now, why is that important? Because guess what happens on April 15th? People file their taxes. People file their taxes, but guess what? The majority of Americans get refunds. So guess when they're going to be receiving those refunds? About the first 2 weeks of May. And guess what? That statement's going to remind one of those people in the household, we've not been tithing. Oh, guess what? We just got our refund check. Let's send that in and catch up our tithe. Don't wait until November and then December and then January the next year to tell people they were behind on their tithe. Help people steward their own finances. And that's a giving statement. But also use that giving statement for other things, right?
Right.
As advertisements, because you can get 4 pieces of paper in one envelope and be 1 ounce. You do 5, then you got 2 stamps on it. Just do the 1 stamp. Now I'm getting really in the weeds. I'm sorry. That's just me. I'm geeking out here a little bit. So
that's great. I love it. We are getting close on time. We do have a couple more questions, so we definitely want to get to them. Jesse asked, what are some of the best practices when it comes to involving volunteers in budgeting? That's a really great question. Either review, advisory, or simple reconciliation.
Well, first of all, when you're having money counters, that should be all volunteers. I can't begin to tell you how many times I go into a church and they've hired out all their money counters. I'm like, oh my goodness, this is ridiculous. And because some of our largest churches in America that we do, these are huge, mega churches. Volunteers do the money counting. Okay. Now you might have a paid staff coordinate all that, organize it. You have to have paid people, empower them, keep it going and reconciling. But ultimately, then you have that first come in. So the money comes in, they can post it, they can do all this. And of course, they've got to be vetted. You got to have trustworthy people. You can't just have anybody in there. You got to have proper segregation of duties when you're using volunteers. So you can't just have anybody willy-nilly do this. That's on the income side. Now, the expense side, absolutely. Ask some volunteers. There's people in your church that retired accountants, retired bookkeepers, and they'll come in and maybe do some financial closes for you, do some bank recs. Man, if I had my way, we would have volunteers do everything, because guess what? We would not have as much administrative costs, and we could put everything into ministry. So again, what should we be about? Even the accountant on site should be about empowering the laity, the volunteers, to do what God's asked them to do.
That's great. Yeah. All right. Last question. Pastor Jim asks, we're a legacy church working to improve financial clarity by separating designated funds from operational accounts. What strategies have worked for others to both implement the shifts well and to bring volunteer finance teams and ministry staff into alignment with the new process? Excuse me.
No, it's all good.
Where my contacts today.
There you go. Okay, couple things there. Designated spending, bring it into clarity. The biggest thing that I get when I go into a church is they say, I've got $5 million in the bank. And I say, well, total cash, minus what's been designated equals available cash. And they go, and I say, wow, guess what? You should have $6 million in the bank, but you only have 5 because your operations has been spending the money because you didn't properly departmentalize money when it came in. Or you were running an income statement that was one column. So the easiest way to do this is to break out your fund type, F-U-N-D. It's not fun, F-U-N. This is not fun. It's fund, F-U-N-D. And so you break it out by fund, right? So you say operations, ministry, missions, building. And we have examples of this that we can show you. So just reach out to David and we can talk you through this in a more specific manner. But that's the way you start. So you got to get sort of like things organized. And then you say, okay, what's my total cash and investments, whatever it is, minus all the funds that are truly designated, like missions, building, whatever you include. That could also be those reserve accounts too, because the board or leadership can do self-reserves beyond what donors want. And so then you say, what are all those designated funds added up? And then you say total minus the designated funds equals available cash. And you want that available cash to be positive, because then that's what I call free cash, right? And then what you do is you allocate, I call it red light, yellow light, green light. For this organization, what's a green light? Okay, if we have $1 million of free cash or maybe $250,000 of free cash, that's green light. We're vision. We're casting vision, we're running. If it gets down to 100,000, we're yellow light, we're slowing down. If it's red light, we're stopped, right? No more spending except absolutes like salary, utility bills, mortgage, things like that until it gets back up. And then when it gets back up like over 250, you're like, okay, we're green light again. Let's go. We're gonna do stuff. So that's the best way to start doing it. It's just a simple little dashboard, a scorecard report. We call it at our firm. The only people in life who don't want a scorecard is the Sacramento Kings because they're horrible. They're just really bad. And I apologize for everybody, but I'm from Sacramento. But like, you got to be looking at that scorecard. Well, that scorecard's got to start with cash because churches are so much cash generated. If they don't have cash, they're not going to be in business. And so, and by the way, there's nothing not for profit about a church. We're just not in it for profits. A church has to make profits to stay in business. Okay. So you can't always have all losses. Okay. I hope I answered that question.
Yeah, that was great. I think the theme today is just intentionality. I love that you encourage pastors to get their staff and even volunteers involved with the process. When people are involved, they are then accountable. And I think that helps churches to create a better system and see a larger impact or buy-in, I guess, from different people. So that's great. We are close to the top of the hour. Like I said earlier, we are going to be following up this webinar with an email so you can have access to it. And we'll also add in some tools that you can use for budgeting. One of the things and one of the reasons I love working for this firm, and it's something that Steve reminds us of constantly, almost after every single one of our meetings, is we have an opportunity to add value and serve the church. And that is exactly why we put this webinar on today. And that's exactly why we do what we do. We do it so we can add value to you guys, to the church. And so if there is any interest in engaging with our firm at a deeper level, maybe you just want to ask more questions. Maybe you want to talk a little bit more about our process or some of the tools or softwares that we use to implement for churches. I would love to connect with you personally. We want to build relationship. We are in this for the long haul. Steve's been doing this for 22 plus years. We have every bit of intentionality to continue to do that moving forward, and we want to come alongside you. So let us know if there's any way that we can serve you. Hit me up on our website, or you can email me directly. Feel free to text me as well. That is my phone number. I'd love to connect with you that way, whatever is easiest. We'd also love for you guys to check out the podcast, Church Advisory Podcast. Check it out on all the platforms. But again, thank you so much for your time today. I really hope this added value to you. And we look forward to connecting and seeing you guys moving forward. I hope you guys have a great day. Thank you so much.
Thank you again.